Welcome to the Vandy Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Our guest today is George Plaster of Nashville Sports Radio. We thank our presenting sponsor, Wellspire, Nashville's Learning and Development Center. Wellspire offers personal and professional development opportunities in a beautiful facility in the Gulch neighborhood. Stop by for an event with world-renowned speakers or host an off-site event that will wow your team or your clients. We thank our co-sponsor, the Well Coffee House, which turns coffee into water and has a mission to bring clean water to the world. Today's news presented by Sutherland and Belk, a Nashville-based injury law firm. Sutherland and Belk is committed to fighting for those who've been injured in car, motorcycle, and truck accidents. Check them out at sbinjurylaw.com. Vanderbilt 71, Texas A&M Corpus Christi 66. That is your final in basketball from Monday night. Aaron Neesmith leads the Commodores with 21 points. Vanderbilt is 2-0 and will travel to Richmond next. Our guest line, presented by Boll & Branch, started by Vanderbilt graduates Scott and Missy Tannen. I've slept on their sheets for about 6 years. Now, I would not trade them for anything. They are fair trade certified, which means they are made under safe conditions by men and women, treated and paid fairly. Try them free for a month. You can return them, but you won't want to. Once you get the sheets, try the mattress. That was voted best mattress of 2018. Go to bollandbranch.com. That is spelled B-O-L-L. Enter the promo code VANDY and get $50 off your first set of sheets. George Plaster of Nashville Sports Radio joins me now. George, we appreciate you coming on as you do every week. How have you been?
Chris, I'm good. I hope you are, and hope all the listeners are. Man, it's cold outside.
It is cold outside. My daughter threw a crying fit this morning when she discovered school was in session, which surprised me because we call off school now for rumors of snow and ice, and there was actually a patch or two on the road, but anyway.
Yeah, it's a little early for this, though. That's what scares me a little bit.
Yeah, it does me too. But although I'm ready for a big snow, I'm ready to take the kids sledding and all the stuff that we got to do as kids, which we seem to go winters without these days.
Oh, bingo.
Let's talk football. I once poked the brain of a wise man who has been through a rodeo or two like this. I said, what do you do when you run out of things to talk about? And the advice I got was be true to yourself and don't throw bombs. And with that, I think I'll mute the mic and just let you take the show from here.
Okay, well, obviously Saturday was kind of a disaster. I think at the outset, the defense played very hard, and the fact of the matter is they were only down 7-0 about midway through the second quarter. The defense, I had thought for about 2.5 games, had been getting considerably better. I think one of the things that goes on when you know full well that your offense isn't going to score and isn't going to give you any help, it's really a demoralizing part of football, and that's where they are. Offensively, they were completely useless. I thought their game plan was really pretty, I don't know what the word is. I just wasn't very impressed. You know going in that you're going to have trouble blocking Florida's front four defensively, and yet you're taking these 5- and 7-step drops, and it was only in the third quarter that the concept of screen them, get the ball out quick, that's the first time that ever came up, and I'm sorry, that's just way too late in the game to figure that out. And I blame their brain trust for a lot of that. You can see from television shots that the offensive guys are very frustrated, and you saw it with Keyshawn Vaughn when he sort of threw the little punch back at the Florida player. The body language after that was not very good. The TV guys, Bob Wischusen, Dan Orlovsky, pointed that out during the telecast. I think Derek has lost the offensive side of his football team. How you go about getting it back, I wouldn't pretend to know. but I do think I've seen enough football to believe that they no longer believe in whatever scheme it is that they're trying to accomplish.
No, and I think that's been the case for a while. I thought there were two moments that summed up the game. First was when Florida goes for it on its first possession. I think it was 4th and 1, maybe 1.5 at around its 43. Doesn't get it, turns the ball over to Vandy. Vanderbilt can't even get a field goal attempt out of it. And I thought that was interesting for the reason that that's how inept the offense was. And I think that that offensive performance was about as bad as I ever remember. And we saw some really bad offenses out of Vanderbilt in the 90s and beyond, of course. But that was sort of a defining moment where Florida just says, okay, we're going to go for it here. We don't care if we get it or not because we're not scared of you. And they didn't have right to be scared of Vanderbilt on offense. This,
Yeah,
I'll let you hit
no
that, and then I'll go to
fear.
the second. Yeah.
Yeah, there's no fear of this offense at all. It's a 10 yards at a time offense in a college football world where people are getting big chunk plays. There's just nothing there. And, I continue to wonder, what the scheme is with the big three, because the big three is down to one essentially, and that's Keyshawn Vaughn. And it's now very clear that he's fed up with it. His body language kind of showed that.
The other play was about 2 minutes into the second half. Vanderbilt is somehow only down 14-0, and Florida throws a quick out or a screen or something to the near side of the field, the near side being the TV side. And it looked like a defensive back has a chance to push the guy out of bounds, doesn't do it, and the guy just not tight ropes the sideline, but he just kind of runs straight down it. There's a couple other defenders in the picture. They can't make a play. I don't ever like to call a team out for quitting because you just don't know, but it looked like less than max effort to me on that play. And that's at the point I just thought that, okay, the offensive futility has gotten to them. They have given it a lot of effort, and it just eventually human nature a lot of times just runs its course. And that looked like a moment to me where it had.
Yeah, look, this is very reminiscent of when I was Vandy's announcer back in the mid '90s, and they knew, that they were not going to get anything done on defense. That probably 13 points was about the max that they were ever going to score in a game against, legitimate competition. And what that really speaks to is that you have zero margin for error. Anything that goes wrong is a catastrophe because you're not going to bounce back from it. When you know that 10 to 13 points is the max that you're going to score, you got no margin for error. And eventually, you said it, human nature kind of takes over. At 21-0, you just saw a complete sag in them, and Florida took advantage of it and had a field day.
When Bryce Drew was going through the final games of last season, I just started thinking to the so what part. And Bryce obviously had excuses that he made many times. The Darius Garland thing, obviously that was legit, but you have to pick up and carry on. And I just start to think at that point, okay, they had a bad season. They finished 13-14 in the SEC the year before. They finished winless last year in the SEC, which had not been done, I think, since Georgia Tech in the early 50s. Then you start thinking, well, they're not going to be very good next year. They are, who knows, 2 years from now, maybe they have a chance with the right recruits. But his coaching had not exactly inspired anybody's confidence. So it's then at that point, so now what? And at least Bryce in that case had shown he could recruit at a high level. Maybe it did or did not matter, as we found out. But here's what I'm getting at. You start looking ahead and thinking, okay, Bryce is in the spot, let's say, where he improves the team this year if he's still around. Well, so what? Let's say that you win 4 or 5 conference games instead of 0. Well, you've improved the team, but you haven't gotten it to a level where anybody is excited about it or buys in, and your cumulative win-loss record is pretty horrible at that point. I see Derek in the same situation where when you get to this point, you've got to go to the so what? How does this get better? And it is getting hard to see it getting better. The recruiting part he's got to now recruit to the junior class. And he is giving nothing to get excited about with this season. So it's like, well, they're not going to have a great recruiting year as it is this year. By Vanderbilt standards, it's not a bad class. But if they don't keep Ken Seals, who's the best quarterback they've signed in a while, probably, if they sign him, it gets really bleak. And then you're like, well, if they can't bring in a class next year, okay, you look to next year, and I'm sorry for the long-winded nature of this question that comes with the preamble of sorts, but you say, okay, next year, let's say that he improves. Nobody's expecting a winning season, but he improves. Well, so what? That's still 7 losing seasons in a row. So then what do you do for 2021? Like Bryce, and without the recruiting piece, I'm just at the point where I'm like, how do you have something that he can reasonably meet that gives people reason for hope? And I'm just not coming up with anything.
No, the hope part has kind of gone down the drain. And that's unfortunate. But I think human nature is what it is. And I don't see a lot of hope right now off what's happened. The 56-0 game could have been very damaging to Derek. It also might not be damaging at all. And you say, well, how could that be? Well, I don't have their spreadsheet in front of me to know whether they really have the money to buy him and his staff out, if that's what they want to do. I say that because they've just gotten through having to buy out Bryce Drew. My suspicion is that the university is going to say, sure, you can make the change if you want, but you're going to fund it. And so the question is, how do they go about funding it? And I've thought for a while.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think that if they can get the money, they can do it. I don't know how much money it is. Now, the sums of money I'm hearing privately that they're raising in their capital campaign are staggering, and I think a lot of that has already been raised for athletics. I don't know how you structure the ask for that, if that's what you want to do in between all the other things that they are trying to do, and how well that goes over at the university level. But I think you and I both think Malcolm Turner is not stupid, and under ordinary circumstances, I think they'd be moving on from a coach.
I think they would be too, because I think you could call it kind of a vote of no confidence right now from the fan base. I don't think the fan base has very, very much confidence in this staff's ability. And the other thing is, we're now in an age where there's very little patience. Chad Morris just found that out a few days ago when he got fired at Arkansas. And now all of a sudden, Hunter Yurachek, who is a former Vandy marketing and promotions director from back in the early 90s, has a big decision to make, because Arkansas football cannot continue where it is. That's sort of what's going against Derek. Is we're now in kind of a society that wants something. In the old days, there used to be this thing that really all you had to do was beat Tennessee if you were Vanderbilt's football coach. And he has beaten them 3 years in a row, and Vandy's beaten Tennessee 5 of the last 7. But the scary part is that doesn't seem to have done anything to help the fan base. The fan base is as small as I've ever seen it, to the point that the home games have become kind of embarrassing when you look and you just see absolutely nothing. And that gives Malcolm Turner the easy out no matter what, just to say, look, nobody's showing up. We can't pay the bills this way.
I'm seeing people on our board make comments to the effect of, I have followed the program for fill in the blank 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and I'm at a point where I'm about ready to walk away. People will say things like, I didn't even know what time the game was on Saturday, or I went out knowing what time the game was and checked the score at halftime, and it kind of was what I thought it was, or saw the score after the game. And when you get people to disengage with you, and they just drop off your radar. It's hard to do that and to get those people back, even sometimes when you do make a change, because once you kind of pull the plug on your emotional buy-in, that is tough to get back.
Well, I think it's one of the things that the Titans have been experiencing as well. That a group that bought tickets when they first came to town, a lot of them have given them up, and the reaction you get sometimes is, I've discovered that life can go on without it. Being a Vanderbilt athletic fan is not easy. Now, it's easy when you get to baseball season because Tim Corbin has established a level of excellence that nobody could ever imagine. But in the football world, to try to be a fan, because this looks so much like what I dealt with in the mid '90s, where you knew you were never going to score. You knew that your defense was basically going to have to pitch a shutout for you to have any chance, and they're dull. Offensively, they don't do anything very creative, and so they've got a lot of strikes against them with the fan base, and I can see where people finally just pitch it in and say, "What's the point? Why put myself through this?"
Yeah, and they open with Mercer next year. Let's say they come back with Derek. What's their attendance for the opener, you think?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, look, that's a marketing job. I don't think anybody could take on successfully. I don't know how you bring him back and get the public confidence. And I think that's why Malcolm Turner pulled the plug on Brian and said, "How in the world do I?" It's a tough deal, and but I'll say this again: I don't have their spreadsheet in front of me to know what the rules of engagement are. If the rules of engagement are that the athletic department has to come up with the funds to fire Derek Mason, that's the best thing he's got going for him, because I'm not sure they can.
Well, and they're up against the same thing to a lesser degree in basketball. The crowds have not been great. Now, last night you had freezing precipitation, and I should have looked at the crowd better, but I honestly wonder if they did have more people at the exhibition baseball game on Sunday, or about as many as they had in the crowd last night for Texas A&M Corpus Christi.
Well, it just comes down to winning. It didn't stop. Apparently, they had a massive crowd for the baseball game, and that's going up against the Titans. And what that tells you is, if you win to a certain level, they're coming out. And if you don't win to a certain level, it probably doesn't matter what you do. Winning is your best promotion, period.
And they've got to get out ahead of that now. I know it's not like Malcolm is lacking a bunch of stuff to do as it is, but their attendance, I think, in baseball, and some of that's weather, has flagged behind what I think it should have been for the level of the program they have. I thought that the turnout, I was stunned by what they had, but there were also at the same time photos being tweeted out of they had one concession line open and people were backed up for forever. I think that's the other thing in the midst of this is they do have that one thing to promote. I think they're so, I don't know if understaffed is the word or spread thin or whatever, but that's the other thing that is interesting is now in the midst of all that, they've really got to start promoting that better and thinking ahead with those things better than they have.
Well, I feel bad for Malcolm Turner. Gosh, if you were to take a look at his legal pad of, you know, what are the problems I have to solve? My God, you could be here for now until eternity. On the marketing side, David Williams didn't do them any big favors. He was not a big believer in any of this stuff. And oftentimes I would wonder, has he ever gone to a Predator game and looked at what marketing effectively can do? Because that's That's it's the ultimate example. And they just haven't done those kind of things. And I'm not sure that I can blame their staff for all of it, because I'm not sure monetarily what kind of resources they've been given. I know in previous athletic director administrations that they were given virtually nothing and told to make chicken salad out of what. And that doesn't do it.
I'm thinking as we do this, it's like if Malcolm Turner were a character in the Bible, he'd be Job. It's like every time he turns around, it's like, yeah, a natural disaster just wiped out all your kids, or you know, all all your farm animals just got stolen or whatever. It's like he can't even take a breath without there being some other thing that happens.
Yeah, I mean, look, I've never really sat down and talked to him and said, okay, tell me exactly what you are facing. And one of these days, I hope I'm able to. But it's massive. I mean, he has walked into a sea of problems. I can't imagine outside of maybe Rutgers a place that's got more issues than this place has. Facilities, marketing, football, hopefully not basketball, but women's basketball. I mean, there's a bunch. There's just, when I think about it, I'm like, where do you start?
And here's the thing. And again, this is back to just stuff pops up. I think that they thought they had the football thing stabilized, and that was the one thing that going into the season is like, okay, no matter what, Derek's going to be back. Well, now this, and I would argue that I think more important than facilities or other things is having the right coach. I think your bang for your buck on your investment is James Franklin proved if you get the right one, that transcends so many problems. And I think they're going to have to come to grips with the terms of, okay, that maybe that's our biggest problem right now. And despite all the built in, I don't want to say excuses because there are legitimate reasons with the chancellor search and facilities master plan to show the next coach and all those things. But they may have to reach a point where they say, hey, no matter what our other obstacles are here, that's the one we've got to get right now.
Yeah, you could argue that it's really basketball that should be in that position. But right now, it reached such a level of low a year ago that it's not very realistic that that's going to happen in the next year or so. Off what I've seen so far of their basketball, Aaron Neesmith is the poster child. And for them to be really good, he's almost got to be Patrick Mahomes. He's got to throw for 400 yards a game for them to have a chance when they get into conference play. He's going to have to be Michael Jordan. And just on the football side, what you really have now is a fan base that doesn't have any confidence in this staff. And that's the problem. Whether Derek's the right person or not, you've got a fan base that doesn't believe. And that's a dangerous proposition because it'll hurt you at the gate.
Let's talk hoops. I think the Michael Jordan, Aaron Neesmith analogy is pretty close, but I do think they have some supporting players. I think Saban Lee has played pretty well. He had 8 assists last night, and I don't remember 19 points or something. Scottie Pippen has shown some things at times. I don't know how much that's going to hold up once they play guards who can play at a different level, but I did like the play that he made. The biggest assist of the game last night where he goes baseline and finds Saban Lee on a kickout, which at the time looked for all the world like the freshman just ran into traffic and jumped up and got bailed out by an open teammate. Well, it turns out on the way that play was called, he knew where Saban was going to be, so good for him. But I think at that point, you build your hope around those 3 guards and Cleavon Brown, who's played really well. Dylan Dessou has shown some skill, but he's got 3 points in 2 games, and he's a freshman. Yeah, I think that supporting cast, and they've got two freshmen who aren't ready to play right now that they're having to play. You just hope for them that injuries don't strike, because I think you've got to fall off after 4 or 5 guys to where you just hope you can get something out of Moyer and a few of those kids and that nobody gets hurt.
Well, I brought this up a week ago, and I guess I'll kind of say this again. When they get into conference play, the pressure that will be on Aaron Neesmith and Saban Lee is that the two of them are going to have to combine for 35 to 45 points if this team's going to win at all in the conference, which means that neither one of them can have a bad night. If I were playing them, I would never let Aaron Neesmith get anywhere near the basketball when it matters. First of all, he's pretty darn good, and that may be selling him a little bit short. But, I'll take my chances with everybody else. If I'm coaching against them, I'm doing everything I can to see to it that he doesn't get the ball in scenarios where a game might be on the line, because I think he's pretty good.
Yeah, and they got into scenarios last night. We were doing this Tuesday morning where it was kind of like last year, where it was we've thrown the ball around the perimeter and the shot clock is at 5, and now what? We can't get the ball to Aaron, or he's not in the game, and it results in Moyer or Evans shooting up a 3, which is not what you want. They have got to do everything they can to limit those types of possessions.
And it gets hard in conference play because teams scout each other very well in the conference. And by the time you get to February, there are virtually no surprises you can throw at anyone. And that's what makes it so hard. It's also why so many conference games all over the country late. So they better be really good at the free throw line when they get opportunities. And I'm getting into all this conference play because I think we have to be honest. These wins aren't necessarily the beginning of a big spurt in SEC play. This was not the University of Texas. This is whatever it is, Texas A&M or whatever, Corpus Christi. They're not going to be in the Final Four. And, the scheduling that they've done is probably smart. This probably is helping their confidence. And Lord knows that was needed. When you go 0-19, you better get some wins. But you also have to be realistic about whether what you're seeing in November and then into December will be good enough once conference play starts. And the recipe is, it seems to me, that Neesmith and Saban Lee have to be in that 35 to 45 point range for this team to do any winning.
I'm going to get into the mailbag, which is sponsored by Vanderbilt fan and independent insurance agent Josh Minton of Brentwood. Are you in the market for auto, motorcycle, home, renters, or landlord insurance, or even life or commercial insurance? Josh has all that covered. Call him 615-933-1979. Email him at josh@hqinsurance.com. Follow him at facebook.com/JD Minton HQ. He is my insurance agent. I hope you will make him yours. Door King says, it seems like Mason's job could be on the line. Why is Jerry Godowski still calling plays? Wouldn't it be smart for Mason to consider something different to help save his job?
I don't know how to answer that because I don't know enough about their staff makeup to know if there's any bright young mind out there that you can just throw into this mix and say, okay, this is now your job. I don't see any way if Derek were to come back that it could be in this play calling scenario. Let's just leave it at that.
Here's the other thing we talk about looking forward. Okay, they had an offensive coordinator opening in months to find one. I think that they knew good and well they were parting ways with Andy Ludwig around Halloween last year. And he shops around. He's got a job. I think he's got some pretty attractive carrots out there to offer. hey, you come here, you get to coach an All-American running back, an All-American tight end, and an All-SEC receiver. And they couldn't get anybody, apparently, from the outside, so they settled with the guy who had last been a coordinator at Ohio, I think a co-coordinator in 2010 or 2011. And by the way, Godowski, the numbers, I don't know how much was him or how much was another guy, were not bad. I mean, it's not like Ohio is some sort of football juggernaut. But my point is, if you say, okay, let's say the coordinators are the problems, which I think that, look, at the point where he's changed coordinators so many times, I don't think you can keep throwing the blame there. But hypothetically speaking, let's say that you decide that is the problem, he can fix it. Well, if he couldn't fix it last year, how does he fix it next?
Well, I think it goes back to, if you look at when Derek Mason first got here, most of that staff was Ohio U, and it wasn't very good. And it's concerning that he went back to that tree. And I don't really know what to make of that. I don't know if he doesn't have the kind of connections, to get better people. I don't know. Uh, but I know that the Ohio U connection doesn't seem to have worked particularly well.
Yeah, I think at this point that's an understatement. Dusty Orleans says, if you were the AD, what would be your tipping point in firing a coach of any sport?
I would use a couple of words. By the way, that is a great question, because no matter what, you want to be fair. Derek Mason's a good man. He has a family. I watched when a good man 30 years ago went down, Watson Brown, and one of my closest friends in the world. And I know how much it hurt me to see that. So I think you have to get a legal pad out and start putting the positives and the negatives together. Here are a couple of things that hit me. Number one is, when you have a fan base that's just apathetic, which is where they are right now, that is a huge marker against your coach. When you've got that problem, that's a big one. The other one is just a lack of confidence amongst everybody. And whether that's fair or not fair, Derek seems to have gotten himself into a position where not that many people are standing up saying, I believe in Derek Mason. I believe in what he's doing. Not that he's doing anything wrong, but, a lot of, I believe in what he's doing, and if we give him time, it'll all be fine. I think those are two big problem areas right now that, as an athletic director, you have to start saying, if this is really the situation, then I've got to contemplate a coaching change.
Well, there are three things in my mind. One of them is the attendance, the fan support, which, as you correctly pointed out, is worse than ever. The other is, and I've done research on this, like, what is the historical point of futility that you reach in a season that often gets a coach fired? I've used Sagarin rankings because you got to use something objective, and usually once you get in that range where you're about around 100, which means there's not many Power 5 teams worse than you. Right now, that list is Rutgers, and that's it. It's that kind of territory that usually leads to a coach's dismissal. He's kind of been in that territory since about right after the Ole Miss game, and I wrote about it then. And then the other thing is kind of that one bad moment, like Watson Brown had his with SMU. Woody Woodenhofer, I think, had his with the 71-13 Florida debacle where it appeared they quit. That's kind of the other element. And I thought that UNLV game for him, which, by the way, UNLV is still ranked below them in the Sagarins by maybe 20 spots, which tells you how bad that loss was. That, to me, was kind of that game that coaches at Vanderbilt have, and to me, that sort of fit the mold for his. So right now, to me, he's got all three elements going in a bad regard.
I think the other thing that you would throw in there uh, would be, what's the level of player confidence? because it's clear to me that on the offensive side, the big three, pardon my French, look really pissed off. They look like you could fry an egg on their head. Uh, Pinckney's sitting there going, "Why did I come back for this?" I'm sure Lipscomb's having the same thoughts, and now you're seeing Keyshawn Vaughn, who has been the most productive of the three, showing a national TV audience and things. I think that's also got to weigh into what Malcolm Turner is thinking, is that if he doesn't have the player confidence, then whose confidence does he have? And those are two or three things. It was a great question that he threw out there in the mailbag, and it reminds me. It's one of the reasons in sports talk radio that I like going to the phones, because people end up giving me things to talk about that I haven't even considered. And it makes shows a lot better, just like that mailbag makes your deal better.
Well, and to be fair to him, you compare him to other coaches since 1960, his SEC winning percentages and his overall winning percentages are still higher than most coaches in that job. Now, I would argue that is not a beauty pageant of coaches, and maybe that's part of the problem. If they maybe had some better coaches in there, results would have been different. But even the Fires at Rutgers and Arkansas had worse winning percentages than Derek has. It's not that he doesn't have some things on his resume that gave him the pad coming into this season or the margin for error, but it's just you look at him and it's how he's managed the situations and the optics of it and the not having answers and the constantly saying it's on the players to execute and all those things, and then it getting worse as the season going on and the optics with the big three and all that. That's where the problem is for him, is there's nothing out there that gives you confidence. I'm going to say nothing. He turned it around after 2014 in the next couple seasons, and frankly, did a job I didn't think he could do in that regard. So you can't say that historically it's not there, but the fans aren't buying it.
No, the fans aren't buying it. It's a different era. If this were in the 60s and 70s, I don't think we'd be having the kind of discussions we're having. A lot more patience back then. The coaches were also not getting paid anywhere near what they're getting paid now. And so there's a little bit of a trade-off where the coach gets paid more, but the job security is way less, as Chad Morris found out Saturday.
Oh, yeah, and look, if they get rid of Derek, I'm not saying that on a human level I don't feel badly for him. I do agree with you. I think he's a good guy. He's been nice to me many a time, but he will also get paid more not to coach football than I'll get paid in my entire work life.
Absolutely. That's the part now that has changed, is that there's a level of money. Steve Spurrier was the guy at Florida who broke the barrier. And when he got up into the $1 billion range at Florida, and boy, he was worth every penny of it, that all of a sudden escalated salaries to the point where coaches have to understand what it is that goes with that territory. And one of the things, frankly, I've said this before on this podcast, if they do make a change, Malcolm Turner has to make clear to the next guy, you've got to get out, shake hands, kiss babies, go on the speaking circuit. The days of our coaches sitting in a cave have got to be over, because there's been too much of that in recent years where, other than Tim Corbin, who amongst that football and basketball gets out at all?
And let's be honest, I think the undercurrent that most people did not know about that really did Bryce Drew in was that in terms of being so insular and not reaching out to the former players. I think there was a pretty large groundswell of non-support that Malcolm Turner heard in the spring as this got worse that contributed to Bryce Drew's firing. I don't know that it is at the same level for football, but I think it is also present to some degree as well there.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's a deal where he's got to call a staff meeting at some point. Not that I need to tell him how to be an athletic director, but the point has got to be drummed home that, look, we're in a competitive marketplace. We're competing for the entertainment dollar. And if you all think it's going to be okay to just sit in your cave and never come out, you're going to be wrong. And, you know, now that he's in there, he's got to make it clear to them that those days are over. Whether he's done that or not, I don't know. But I know if I were the athletic director, and the good news is I'm not and I'm never going to be, that's one of the messages that I'd be carrying is, you know, it's going to be the marketing department's responsibility to get you out there some. But when they ask you to, you do it.
Puniverse says, pertaining to football, if you were AD, what would your top three priorities to try to be to accomplish as soon as possible?
Oh, wow. Well, as I'm driving around Nashville, let's just sort of pluck a few out of thin air. Wouldn't the stadium, and let's go 1 and 2. Stadium improvements and football facilities that are not the stadium probably have to be 1 and 2. Would you buy that?
Yeah, and I think things that affect recruiting, the locker room is a big thing. I think that's going to be sort of a combination locker room players lounge. And from what I'm hearing, I don't want to share all the details specifically because I don't want to burn anybody, but I think they're going to do that pretty well. I think that is on their drawing board. I think honestly, I think there's been a lot more movement in football and basketball than people really know, and a lot more fundraising has already happened behind the scenes. So I guess, look, it is a depressing time for Vanderbilt fans. That is one thing that I can tell them where I think there is something to be encouraged about.
I would think the third one, first of all, I don't really know where they rank as far as are their assistant coaches getting paid to the level that the rest of the SEC is. My suspicion is they're not. And if that's the case, that might be a third one where they take some money and do something. The other might be to really give marketing some money to do some things. You brought up the Mercer game. Um, I can remember in the old days, they used to do a big fireworks show after the game. Now, I know there are neighborhood issues that sometimes get in the way of that kind of stuff, but just maybe some of that kind of thought process to try to jazz up, something that on the surface doesn't look like a great deal.
Yeah, and I think there's been some movement privately on that as well. Again, I don't know when that is going to come about. But just back to the same thing. It's like they cannot stop the holes in the boat quickly enough right now.
Yeah, look, again, I wouldn't want Malcolm Turner's job right now, and I guess in a perfect world, I would love to hear off the record what this has been like, because he has walked into more holes than a Swiss cheese factory. It's just every time one thing gets fixed, another pops up, and it just goes on and on and on. But, he wanted this job, and boy, has he gotten a challenge.
Yeah, somebody told me that's been over there a while. When I took the job over here, I knew about a lot of stuff, and I knew that it was going to be tough. He said, but I didn't have a clue as to the overwhelming majority of it. I have a feeling that Malcolm is in that same spot.
Yeah, and look, my guess is that he got sort of the sunshine speech uh, from the guy who hired him, Nick Zeppos, who had no clue what was going on athletically and didn't care. So if there were big problems, he could probably, truthfully say, I had no idea the extent of what wasn't going on there. Um, so I don't doubt that he walked into something and said, "Oh my God, what have I walked into?" Because it's massive.
The other problem, and I don't know exactly how to articulate this, Vanderbilt is a place that you and I both have a lot of respect for and has done great things. But it also has sort of a, I don't know, a weird culture where there's a lack of communication and awareness is kind of the best way I know to put it. I can't put my finger on it. And I've seen this. I worked in higher ed at a VP type level before I did this full time. And it was a smaller school, but I was at board meetings and things like that. And a lot of times I would sit in on those and I would know that we had massive issues, but I couldn't open my mouth. And you would sit there and you'd watch the president relate things to the board. And I'm like, oh man, that is a very shaded version of the truth. And you left out this and that. And the board sits there and they don't know any better, right? And you can't say anything. And then you can find things. And I think they've done this, this is the theory that somebody told me. It's like, I think when the board asks about sports in the past, you can say, well, hey, look over here at women's golf and tennis and baseball and all these things. And you can pass it off enough as, hey, look, sports are in great shape. We're financially in the black and all these things. And everybody says, great. And you move, and you're sitting there knowing, no, things are in terrible shape. And I think that's part of the challenge, too, is I don't know how aware a lot of people were about how bad it really had gotten.
Chris, we need to take that last 45 seconds and just bottle it. There's no need for me to say anything more on that because you said it perfectly.
Well, every now and then I step into one, but let's see. A few more
You,
good questions left.
you hit a
Pete,
home run.
well, I hope I did, but I really do think that sums up a lot. And to that, honestly, I think that there was a lot of not truth telling is the right way to put it. And I think that it was kind of a convenient arrangement between Williams and Zeppos, where for years they could point the finger and they could tell enough of the truth about their lack of, for lack of a better term, for doing the right things. I think that it was always convenient for both of them to point the finger at the other guy, and they both kept collecting big paychecks, and it just got worse.
Yeah. Again, you've said it perfectly. There's not much I can add to that.
Pete Orr, speaking of chancellors, wants to know how close Vanderbilt is to getting a new chancellor. I really feel this has to happen before any big athletic decisions are made.
Well, it's a really good point that he's making. What I've heard is that they're very close, that they're down to the final, three or four, whoever those candidates are. He raises a really good point, which is, do you go ahead and do whatever you might be thinking about doing while you're in this chancellor limbo? Um, it's a great point, and it's one that probably Malcolm Turner knows the answer, and we don't.
Yeah, I've heard the same thing. I've heard that they are down to the final interview process, and I would presume it's going to be, I don't know, probably not more than a couple of months. That's just me guessing. Nobody has told me a timeline, but it does sound like they are very close. Okay, some good ones from J2M. These are some fill in the blanks. Jerry Stackhouse will be successful in his first year if he can fill in the blank.
If he can get people's confidence that the program is moving in the right direction.
If you had to put win totals on that, what do you have in mind? I'm formulating a number in my head in SEC wins and overall wins, and I want to see what you come up with without me telling you mine to bias your answer.
I think if he got 4 SEC wins, he's probably doing a heck of a job. This is probably a 10 or 12 win season. But I don't think. Look, I don't think that's the important piece here. I think the important piece is that they play hard every night. That people come away going, you know what? That's a team really trying. There's not a lot of backbiting going on. They play hard. They do. They get the most out of what they have that you can get. That's kind of what you're looking for here.
Yeah, I like your answer better than the one that I tried to frame in terms of wins and losses. And my numbers, by the
It's a
way,
lot safer, isn't it?
were 4-13. But this is where I think you've hit on a good point. I think when a team is so poorly coached, and I think you're seeing it in football, you've seen it in football in the past, you saw it in basketball, it is really hard to know just how bad the team is. Now, I don't think this is a very talented team, don't get me wrong, but I remember the Robbie Caldwell team. I just thought it never entered my mind that James Franklin would take them to a bowl in the first year, and I'm just like, this isn't going to happen. I have seen what they have. There is no way you can make chicken salad out of what looked like chicken something else.
Are we continuing to fill in the blank?
Yeah, we are. we are indeed. But the point is, when you have a swing of really bad coaching to really good coaching, sometimes the outcomes are a little greater than what you think. But I think that 4-win, 12-13 overall is kind of where we're both sitting. So.
Okay.
If Derek Mason returns to Vanderbilt next year, it means fill in the blank.
It means they probably did not have the money as an athletic department to do what some of you want them to do.
I think that's a great answer. Yeah. I think that's perfect.
So do we ring the bell or what do we get for a great?
I think we just keep giving each other virtual pats on the back. I'm sure the audience loves that. So,
dinner at Shoney.
Is Shoney still around anymore?
There are a couple still left.
My wife hates Shoney's. I think that's like a cultural experience. Like if you live in the South, you have to do at least once. So I think she's done her once and there won't be a second. But anyway.
Okay.
The real reason Vanderbilt does not support the football team adequately is fill in the blank.
Is that they haven't cared.
Yeah. Which I do think, again, is changing. Time will tell, but that's the story since 1960, other than very small pockets. And it's and that's the thing. When you neglect a program for so long, the issues just become so massive to fix. And I know that they are aware of that. I talked to somebody this morning that had been involved in some, I'm not going to say high-level conversations, but this guy knows what's going on. And he said, look, there's an awareness that if we don't fix some things, that it's just going to get worse, and we've got to be in on this. So I'm really anxious to see where this goes.
Chris, a friend of mine told me one time when I was buying a house, he said, you have to understand something. He said, if you neglect your house and you just blow it off for years and years and years, one day you will eat your roof for lunch.
Yes. And I don't think those were gingerbread houses either.
I always remembered that.
Yes. I think this kind of sums it up. I think that, and I've talked to Adam Sparks about this. I've said for a long time, I just don't think they cared or they wanted to punish sports. Or I mean, who knows? You don't get a lot of transparency, so we're all left to guess. Adam's take was, I just think they look at it as just sports. Well, okay, fine. I understand that, but that's like, let's say that you're not a fine arts aficionado, but somebody gifts you some Van Goghs. You don't go just put them in a moldy storage shed. The point is not whether you like sports or not or whether you care about it. You've got to value that as an asset. And I just don't think that there has been the awareness traditionally of what those assets are worth. And to put it mildly, I think they just put football in the moldy storage shed.
Yeah, look, I think it was Joe Johnson when he was the president at the University of Tennessee that said the football program is the front door to the university. And I think what he meant by that was here we have an opportunity 7, 8 times a year to have 100,000 people visit our school. Now, in a perfect world, we'd all visit it for a biology lab or a speech debate, but that's not the way the real world works. 100,000 people go up there for football, and so it's important that you put your best foot forward, or to put it the way another person did, if you're going to be a great school, you need to strive to be great at everything you do. And they have not done that at all. They've had much more of an attitude of just don't embarrass us and it'll all be fine and here we go. And, that's fine. They do a lot of great things as a university. The medical center, goes without saying some of the great things they do. But in the world of athletics, their mindset has really been off target. It just has been.
Now that we have solved all of Vanderbilt's problems, do you have anything to
Right.
add before we end the show today?
Do I have anything to add? Yeah. We're 135 days away from the start of the Major League Baseball season, and this snow in November is depressing. God, this,
The
this
cold
is too
depresses me more
early.
than the snow. Snow does not depress me. Bitter cold without snow is what depresses me, and I'm afraid that's where we're headed next.
Yeah.
But speaking of baseball, I
Yeah.
have not followed the free agency rumor mill and such. What are the Braves going to do?
Well, the biggest question they've got is to whether they can re-sign Josh Donaldson. What's going to happen in the free agent market is some teams are going to go to a third year. Donaldson, I think, is 34. And so there's some teams that are going to offer him a third year. Truthfully, the Braves only want him, would like to offer him for 2 years, and 2 years probably at about 50 million, because he had a heck of a year. He sort of bet on himself, signed a 1 year deal with Atlanta, and had a monster season. Right now, their alternatives, if he doesn't sign, are Austin Riley, who was great in May, but not very good down the stretch, and Johan Camargo, who didn't have a very good year. Then they're going to have to go out and get a starting pitcher or two on the market. And the biggest rumors are Zach Wheeler from the Mets, who is an Atlanta kid, grew up there, and Madison Baumgartner, who has had a great career with the Giants, who's from North Carolina, and there's a belief that he would like to return to the South if he's not going to pitch for the Giants. And those are some of the big rumors. The other one would be Yasmani Grandal, the best free agent catcher on the market from Milwaukee. They want him. I don't think they can get him because I think his price tag is going to go through the roof. This Braves report is brought to you by Georgia Power.
Well, the Donaldson piece, I think the problem there is I would almost guarantee, especially with his hamstring issues in the past, there's almost no way that he's going to be worth what you'll have to pay him for 3 years. But that's kind of what you have to do to get him. I thought that he was the piece to that puzzle that they really needed, not just in terms of the production, but the way that he seemed to interact and fit in with that team. I think they desperately need to re-sign him if that's possible.
Yeah, look, it's expensive when you start getting into we're good enough to win a world title. And I still believe in the next 2 to 4 years, they're going to knock that door down, and this young nucleus is going to win a world title. One of the things that holds them back is Liberty Media. Liberty Media is a little bit like Vanderbilt has been over the years. I don't think they really care. I think they just view the Braves as sort of a, profit loss thing on their balance sheet. And that's a shame. It somehow, a lot of people have hoped that they would put that team up for sale and that a local group in Atlanta or in the Southeast would buy it, because they're really on the cusp of something really good. But you often hear, that in the off season that Alex Anthopoulos is having to do a lot of making chicken salad out of fill in the blank. And, probably that's the reason that Nick Markakis has gotten an extra 2 years in Atlanta, is because he's come at a bargain price tag. But toward the end of last season, he wasn't good enough at bat to help them when they needed it the most.
Well, the one thing he could always do was stay on the field, and he didn't do that the last couple of months. But what is Ted Turner doing these days?
I don't know, but boy, could you imagine the combination of the young nucleus that they've put together and then Turner's willingness to spend, freely. You think about in the run that they made in the 90s, people like Fred McGriff that they added, that they no more could add now than the man in the moon. That said, they did add Dallas Keuchel as a free agent. He was okay, apparently not good enough that they're really thinking about re-signing him. I think they've made the decision as an organization that, they're going to go elsewhere. Now watch as I say that when they re-sign Dallas Keuchel in the next couple of days. But that's sort of what everybody thinks is going on.
Yeah, well, it's going to be fun to follow them, because I'm with you. I think they've got a great nucleus of young players. I don't know who the arms are all going to be, but they've just got so many of them that I think that you throw in Acuna, I do worry about him a little bit, that
Sure.
he might Andrew Jones himself in mid-career. But
Yeah.
there's a lot to be excited about at this point for sure. So, and with
Well,
that, I will.
And on the Vandy front,
Yeah.
Kyle Wright's one of them, Chris, that ultimately could make the step up that is a missing piece for them. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but anyway, that's that.
No, I'm glad you said that, because I'm still a believer in Kyle after seeing him pitch. I must have seen Kyle pitch 36 times at Vandy, and I just like the way he goes about things. I think eventually that kind of kid, whatever it is he's had to work through, I think eventually he gets to the other side and sticks, just because I think the between the ears part for him has always been there, ever since the first pitch he threw at Vanderbilt.
There's nothing that I'm aware of that says that they have lost confidence in him. I think it's more just a seasoning, how many innings on the minor league level before ultimately he's ready. They kind of had to rush him at the start of 2019 because they ran into a short-term starting pitchers with injury kind of stuff. And so he ended up starting the third game of the season, and he clearly wasn't ready at that point. But I know they believe there will be a day that he's going to be ready and that he's going to be good.
George, thank you so much. Tell people where they can find your show before we end our podcast today.
Yeah, it's not Georgia Power. It is 560 on the AM dial and 95.9 on FM. We're on 2 to 4 p.m. every day. Watson Brown, former Vanderbilt football coach, and Terry McCormick, TitanInsider.com, with me. And, with each passing day, I can tell that more and more people are starting to sample our product, and I'm very excited about that.
Well, it's a good product, and you have made our product here much better, and we appreciate you joining us.
Chris, if that's the case, you need to go back to the drawing board. Just kidding.
That's been the theme of the fall, I think. But anyway.
Hey, great talking to you.
As always, he's George Plaster. I'm Chris Lee, host of the Vandy Sports Podcast. We appreciate you listening. We'll drop a couple of more of these later in the week.